Hello, I'm Stuart Preston, and this is the Stoned Ape Reports, where I have conversations with those who have changed their lives with the help of psychedelics. In this episode, I had the honor of speaking with author Bett Williams. We discussed her new book, The Wild Kindness, a psilocybin journey. The conversation covered her journeys and some ideas of hers that go a bit outside today's psychedelic community norms. The book is awesome, and her point of view is really refreshing. So let's welcome Bett. Bett, thank you so much for joining me here on the Stoned Ape Reports. I'm really honored to have you, especially in light of this amazing book that is just coming out as we're talking, right?
The official day was yesterday.
Yesterday, awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So maybe by the time this is published, I will be sitting down and reading my hard copy. So I'm very excited about that. Yeah, and when we get to...
what I heard was Amazon is nutty right now. It's taking like 2 months to ship books, and so I wanted to recommend for anyone buying books right now, there's a bookshop.com is a kind of a new place that people are buying books.
Good. And is that the one listed on your website?
It should be, yeah.
Okay. All right. bettwilliams.com. Yeah, so I'm excited about that. You know, I've already dug into the book. It's for anybody out there looking at it, if you're expecting a how-to book on this, that's not exactly what it is, but such a great story and so much great relevant information to all of us here in this plant medicine world. But I kind of wanted to talk to you about, the psychedelics and what they mean to you, and obviously a big emphasis on mushrooms, throughout this book. So given this whole amazing history that you've laid out in this book, what do mushrooms mean to you today in your life? If you were to tell somebody what they mean to you, what do they mean to you?
It makes me think of, the beginning of my path, which I would say is about 10 years ago. I thought like, wow, wouldn't it be cool if mushrooms become like an ally plant? If I get I get to be an expert on them or something. And 10 years in, I think of Kathleen Harrison, the former wife of Terence McKenna, says about cannabis that it's her sister wife. And for the mushrooms, they are not my sister wife. Like the more I do them, the more humbled I am, the more mysterious they become. I definitely do not have a swagger when it comes to like being any kind of pro with the mushrooms. I'm just like, wow, they are just a humbling, beautiful, mysterious thing. And they do have a quality and an essence, like an old friend that I do experience when I do journey with them. And I feel that I can tap into their wisdom in sober states most of the time. Their incredible wit and humor, and mostly their ability to remind me not to take myself too seriously or take my own thought process too seriously. So the psychedelic experience in general, I think people will often say about LSD, like they only had to do it once because the experience never leaves you in a way. Like I'm looking at this cabinet in front of me and I can see what it would look like if I was tripping.
Wow.
It's always there. Yeah.
So do you tap into it when you write? Does it help with your creativity in your writing?
Yeah, well, the reason I wrote this book was because I had been creatively blocked for about 15 years. I've written 2 previous books, literary books that were published, and I was stuck. And so I was like, well, maybe if I write a book about this thing I love, the mushrooms, because they were helping me heal. I use in the early days, I used them to heal myself physically and emotionally in, I guess you would say, a shamanic way. It was a very somatic process of going into my body and kind of removing blocks and things. And so I was like, okay, I'll write a book about mushrooms. And cool, there's no books about mushrooms written by a woman until Michelle, and I did it. And so I used the mushrooms to help me write. And it worked, apparently. Here's the book. Yeah.
Yeah, it sure did. Now you mentioned shamanic, and I think even in the intro of your book, you said you think a solo journey without a shaman or a therapist is kind of the way to go, the preferred method. Is that true?
More and more, I just realized there's so many different ways to go about it. For me, there's
Mm,
an incredible power to give it up to a fungus. It's such a weird thing to do, to just let this thing act upon oneself without a mediator. Because the psychedelic experience is one where you're so vulnerable to everything,
mm,
and you're vulnerable to ideas about what the mushrooms mean and what they can do, and that can be both positive and negative. Like, let's say you have a therapist or a quote unquote shaman, right? That's going to imprint your trip for sure, and that can be really great. I mean, I went to Mexico and decided, okay, let's stop being this sort of, solo flyer here and see what it's like to do in a circle of women's. It was
mm.
Luz Eterna retreats, and man, it was really great to see how these women were doing it, and they were doing it the same way I did, with a bunch of copal smoke and a bunch of singing,
Yeah.
and so that was great.
Yeah, that's awesome. Um, you also compared mushrooms to a sadistic Jungian psychotherapist that kills you for a few minutes. So you've mentioned therapy, but that's quite a description.
Yeah, like there's sometimes that first 40 minutes of a trip, I do often give the advice of like, hey, go easy on yourself for the first 40 minutes because there's a body load to mushrooms, and there's a bitch
Hmm.
slap that happens that I think is a lot about just simply processing the mushroom body itself. And so there's like, I used to have this thing of just kind of hating myself for the first 40 minutes or thinking I was just
Mm.
like a mediocre, trashy person. And it was just, not doing much with my life. And, and that,
Yeah.
and then mushrooms would make me look at that. They would always make me look at my shit and then move past it. And I always
Yeah.
would move past it.
Yeah, they sure do make you look.
Yeah.
Um, now
Yeah.
you mentioned that you started, you had your first psychedelic journey at a pretty young age.
Yes. I
And
was
then
15. Yeah.
you were 15?
Mm-hmm.
And was it if it wasn't one of these Jungian
It wasn't
sadistic
a
changes.
God trip. It was just so beautiful. It was like, oh my God, we get to do this on planet Earth. Holy moly. Like, I met a girl in high school, this goth chick who I never saw before or after the mushroom trip. It's like she just showed up and was like,
Yeah.
want to do mushrooms. And I had a boyfriend at the time, and he was like, you got to go do that with that girl. And so we walked around in these ruins that seemed, I never been there before again either. Like, and I went to bed at night and I felt all these insects and dirt, and it's like I fell in love with the planet. It was as if I didn't even realize like I was on a planet until that moment.
Like you woke up to it, like, wow, look at all this.
Yeah. like
And,
the
and it
earth.
sounds like that has stuck with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Um,
that's the thing about mushrooms is that like I remember almost everything, and it's as if the experiences don't leave me, like they're still with me. Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting because we hear a lot about integration these days. And make sure you write everything down in a journal and you work on it, remember
Mm-hmm.
it. But it
Yeah.
almost seems like subconsciously, it is there afterwards.
Yeah. I have a little chapter on integration because I think integration is kind of funny. I think it's like an excuse to like just get together with friends and talk about tripping, but there's all this like it's so serious, um,
Yeah.
and then like sometimes you can crystallize your experience because in a sober state you can lay a trip on your trip.
So what do you mean by that?
Like if you in a sober state you can kind of go like, oh well, what was meaningful about this trip, and we have a way of using very traditional narrative structures, right? We go to
Yeah.
like, oh, what was like emotionally painful, or what was the big release, and sometimes it, like, what was important may or may not be what your ego brain realizes was important.
Yeah. You think it's possible to maybe overwrite what your ego brain was actually trying to teach you?
Yes, and I think that's one of the reasons people maybe don't trip again, because they go like, oh, well, that LSD trip or that mushroom trip was so deep, and they create a big story about it, and then they carry that story for like their whole life. And memory is a funny thing, you memory is like a photograph of the memory, and then a photograph of the memory, and on and on, to where
Yeah.
the experience is really nothing but a facsimile in your brain. And so I have a big lecture that people who did psychedelics when they were young kind of owe it to themselves to return to that space, because what they've told themselves their whole life is kind of a flimsy facsimile by the
Mhm.
time decades pass.
Yeah, interesting. I never thought about that. That's a good notion to ponder on. Um, in all these journeys that you've gone through, did maybe as a cumulative effort or one or two that stand out, did you have any experiences of transformation where, the mushrooms really helped you in your life?
Yeah, more than I can even count. Like, they call it the God trip, right? And like,
Hmm.
it like the first time I really had that happen, I might have been like the 11th mushroom trip I did, and I literally, it was like a Tuesday, and there was maybe 2 grams in the bottom of the bag from the night before, and
Yeah.
I ate them, and whoa, I have no idea why this thing hit that day in the particular way, but I was just, I could see how everything worked in an interdependent way, to the point where I could feel what my neighbors were wearing in their kitchens and their living rooms, and how they were holding their emotional lives, and how it related to the weeds in the yard and the dogs and the cats. And it was like, wait, we have, like, everything sort of runs smoothly, not because we make it run smoothly, because the nature of
Hmm.
it all ensures it, or something. um, this is why I write, because it's really hard to say these things without my hand typing it into the computer. But
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
so I had the God trip, and I was crying, and that was when I was like, everyone deserves this. Everyone deserves to feel this good, because it also was a physical well-being, a sense of like, finely tuned emotional joy, that I felt like an athlete on all levels, like intellectually and physically, and I was crying, just going, everyone deserves this. Everyone
Yeah.
who wants this should get to feel this. Like, this is crazy that we don't allow this to happen more.
Yeah. That's beautiful. So that was at the Alan Ginsberg-like God trip.
Yeah, holy is
Holy,
the
holy.
all
Yeah.
the things holy. And then I had another God trip with about 4 grams of mushrooms and 2 grams of Syrian rue. Um, do some reading on Syrian rue before you do it. It's not for everyone. But that was one in which, like, a love transmission came through that I've never, I said it was about as subtle as a car wreck. Like it
Mm.
came out of a image of Virgin of Guadalupe, that these Mazatec women, I went to Outlet Jimenez and did ceremony with this elder Mazatec woman, and she says, hey, do you know the Virgin of Guadalupe? And I'm like, I live in New Mexico, of course I know her. And she says, keep her on your altar when you journey, so you can talk to us that way. And so this light was coming out of Guadalupe, and it was so much love that the whole trip was about just being able to let it enter me, into my
Hmm.
body, this incredible love. And I just felt like a little child.
Wow. And
Yeah.
one other time, you also said you learned that you're not sick. Did I get that right?
Oh yeah. Oh, this is another trope of how the mushrooms work with me. There's that 40 minutes, right? And I'm like, oh, I'm so sick. My character's bad. I'm just like,
Mm,
I need to be fixed. Like, I think I'm dying actually. And the mushrooms are just like, they're just like, you're not sick. You're fine. And I'm like, no, I'm just a little sick. Maybe just a little. They're like, you're not sick.
that's awesome.
And then
You're
I
gonna
realized
get
that
over
that's
it.
part of the healing, right? It's just like, oh yeah, it starts in the mind. It starts with me stopping pretending to be sick.
Yeah, and that's what you said in the beginning. The mushrooms will just slap you in the face and tell you what's real.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Now, you mentioned that this first godlike trip was just 2 grams at the bottom of a bag, and I
Hmm.
feel like I saw, you've done up to 7 grams, although I feel like I may have seen 30 grams in there.
I did 30 grams. Yeah. And it's wild because I wanted to do 9 to honor Kai Wingo, who's part of this
Mm-hmm.
very high dose mushroom community, and she passed away. And so I wanted to honor her, and I put the 9 grams on the scale, and I was like, nope. And so that was 3 years ago. And then just recently, Kalindi Iyi, her teacher, passed away, and I ate 30 grams. It's just a different experience. I mean, I don't think it's better, or it's just different. I bet Williams was gone. I just laughed a lot, going like, like anybody who thinks that I'm me, that's funny.
You were gone, and so that's the
Yeah.
experience. Is you were not Bet Williams anymore.
Well, it was strange. Like it was like, I guess it was the ego death, but without the experience of the loss of the ego. Like it's sort of like I skipped that whole process of going like, I'm not me anymore, I'm dying, and I just went straight to like being God, in
Wow,
this state of co-creation. Like I could feel, that I was co-creating the beautiful world with everyone.
wow.
It was beautiful.
Well, I mean, is it scary? Is it rattling? Is it something you're thinking to yourself you might try that again sometime?
Um, Mushrooms are expensive now that I don't grow them anymore. um,
The
so
30 grams is a fee.
yeah, but so I don't know. I think I would only do it maybe if somebody else was wanting to do that much again, because I just don't feel like it's necessary.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I get
yeah,
that. I get that. So what is do you have like a favorite dose? I know like your walk with Clem was also a low dose, experience.
yeah,
Do you have kind of a sweet spot? Do you have 2 or 3 different sweet spots that are your favorite dosage levels?
yeah. I think I like to be between. I think around 5, because I did
Mm,
7 in Mexico, and it just ran me over. Like it was like
yeah.
I was so employed, and I like to do stuff on mushrooms, like offer tobacco and burn juniper and do prayers and things. And
Hmm.
one time I was frustrated on. I think it was because I was on didn't know it was psilocybe azarescens, the
Ooh.
blue mushroom, which is,
Hmm.
I had
Wow.
no idea that those are intensely stronger. So I was very frustrated just sitting on the couch going, I can't move, which is weird because I'm 30. I was like dancing around and walking around, but that particular 7 grams, or no, it was only like 3 grams of that azarescens had me flattened. So I would say like 5 grams of the regular cubensis is probably my sweet spot.
Okay. That's interesting. Yeah, because a lot of people call that the quote heroic dose, so that's kind of a big dose for most people.
Yeah. Oh, can I read you
Um,
just a paragraph from that
yeah,
God trip with the Guadalupe?
please.
I allowed it to happen. I received the gigantic love. The river of it drank through me, dissolving every defense I'd ever had against this love that had always been there waiting. It said I was clean, even though I wasn't and didn't need to be in the face of this love. human as low-hanging fruit on the vine in a garden universe. This bleeding heart show was over now. It never was. Humility and gratitude served as my king and queen, and even that she took from me, saying, only love, girl. Try it. Be that child peach.
Mm, that is nice. That is sweet. What is it about that? Why did you pick that paragraph out to read?
Because it's so hard to explain
Yeah,
the experience of that, and I feel pretty proud of that paragraph because I feel like
yeah,
I accomplished.
yeah, I love that. I can see what you mean when you want to try to describe this stuff that you want to be sitting down at a keyboard so it can flow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, do you ever go on Arrowwood Vault to read trip reports? It's such an interesting literary format, because it's so hard to explain ecstatic states, and
It
people
is
do it
hard,
in
isn't
more
it?
creative ways. Yeah.
And I think I don't when I was first exploring the concept of psychedelics I did, but then honestly trip reports got to be like listening to somebody's dream for me.
Yep.
As I finally got to a point, I was like, oh, I don't want to hear another one of these. And then sometimes even when we talk on this podcast, I tell people like, you don't have to go into all the details about the trip, you know,
Yeah.
full fractals, but just kind of tell me how you felt and what you were like afterwards.
I think that's why art forms are so important in mirroring back the ecstatic experience. I mean, it isn't, in a way, music and books, they're really just there to show us different ways to talk about love, right? So,
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, all the art and the books, you got your book, you got Michelle's, and you have all these other, like the founding mothers and fathers of psychedelics that have all their literature out there.
yeah.
Um, what do you make of the psychedelic movement today? I mean, so you had a long break between this book and your previous books, and obviously this, psychedelics still carry a bit of a stigma with them.
Well,
So,
like, I never, in some ways, it's unnecessary for me to be even part of the movement. But, I was invited to speak at various psychedelic events by Bia Labate, who I met
mhm.
through a friend. And so that was interesting and also challenging because our culture is so structured right now on like, this is how you do it and this is the way not to do it, and so to enter into
Yeah,
that situation, I joke with Beth, my partner, I'm like, yeah, I had to pick who I didn't like or who I thought was doing it the wrong way, and like position myself as like the alternative or something, because that's how we have discourse in America, which is very like being on Twitter, right? and
right.
and very, social media is really, it's all based on like argument basically. So you've got like maps, and you have the psychedelic movement that wants to legalize things for use in therapy, and Michael Pollan's book, really saying like that's the way to do it. I think he overstepped his bounds a little in just being such a novice and flat out saying that stuff was kind of dangerous, which I think is unnecessary, considering that mushrooms, in terms of hospital visits, are like the number one safest substance of all psychoactive from alcohol,
Yeah.
but that's not to say that I say that mushrooms are dangerous in the way poetry is dangerous. And if you don't think poetry can be dangerous, then you don't really understand poetry. like because it makes you do a philosophical inquiry,
Yeah.
and philosophical inquiry is I imagine that you've had to face that as well in your own, the stories that you've told me, how
Hmm.
dangerous the mind can be.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think Michael Pollan, one of his things is he went for the blue azures also, the cyans maybe, and had a kind of a deep, almost paralyzing experience. And maybe if you're a novice doing this stuff and that's one of your first experiences, you can
Oh,
really,
did he get paralyzed? Because I read most of the
yeah,
book, but that stuff apparently can. I think there's a mold in the azurescence that can totally paralyze you. Yeah,
yeah, and it's temporary, but
terrifying.
it happened to me the other day. I was doing my Wim Hof breathing and I couldn't move.
Yeah.
and my hand was locked on my phone, and I was like, uh-oh. And so it is scary when something like that happens. So maybe that's
Mhm.
what happened with him.
I love how he did LSD therapy and with breath work, and he found out like he has a heart condition, and he found out that the breath work was actually more dangerous
Right.
than the LSD.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're right. You're
Yeah.
right on those counts. Um. All right. What else? Okay. Something else I read in the book. You don't recommend going into a journey with a quote singular expectation, which I think a lot of people who've been through the mushroom journeys understand that what your intentions are really don't matter to the mushrooms. But
Yeah. I mean, you're going to do
yeah,
that anyway, right? You're going to go in with
yeah.
an intention.
So that is that what you, I mean? You're kind of like, yeah, just go in and let them share their lessons with you.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost impossible not to kind of bring an intention. It's just really amusing watching the mushrooms go, nope, we're going to work on this instead. And that's when
Yeah,
I know the mushrooms are working. And that I love that feeling where you're just like, oh, everything I thought that was wrong with me, the mushrooms are like, oh no, we're going over here. And it's fascinating how that happens. I think that happens more with mushrooms than with LSD actually,
I
because
do
the
too.
mushrooms are so physical, they really know where to go.
Yeah, and you're right. It's like the best intentions. They're like, yeah, but I know better. Here's what we're gonna learn today.
Yeah. Yeah, like
Um,
they'll just be like, no, it's in your neck, or like it's surprising how smart they
yes.
are and how I'm not. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's like when something hurts on your body and a massage therapist will press on something and around your neck, and you're like, well,
Yeah,
it's not there. And then someone's like, oh, that does feel better. So,
they're smart.
yeah, exactly. Um, so I guess a couple things I saw in the book. I don't know if you want to comment on them. I just wanted to let you know I loved your conversation with Rosie.
In the book, Rosie, I had to write about all this crazy stuff that happened over a period of time that was traumatic and difficult. So I decided that I would use a device, which was, I mean, not to say that Rosie, it's not plausible that Rosie was a CIA agent with a microchip trying to turn me into a cult leader for some sort of MK Ultra style, what do I call Project Lamb Chop.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so we have many conversations where I'm like, I'm not cut out to be a cult leader.
Yeah, that was hilarious. I just loved the sincerity of Rosie's.
Rosie was like, think of what you could do for feminism. And I'm like,
Yes.
I'm not going to be a sociopath for feminism.
Yeah, that was awesome. And then I love your public service announcements. I don't know if you want to comment or not, but I just want everybody to know, you know, great, great set of great advice in this book
Don't
when it
keep
comes
your
when it comes
drug
to this.
dealer's number in your phone. Oh, and
Yes.
here's one more. Come up with a code word for your substance. Mulch, cookies, t-shirts. When buying cannabis in New Mexico, do not use green chili. Likewise, never clever shroomy nicknames and amanita emojis will not do.
There you go. And there's so much more. So
Yes.
definitely get the book and go read that. Bookmark it. I don't know if you're a dog ear person, but mark that so you guys can
The Wild Kindness
reference
of
it.
Psilocybin Odyssey. Yeah. Oh, and the
Yeah.
cover's amazing. The cover's done by Mike Perry, who did the illustrations for Broad City.
Oh wow. Yeah, I love the cover. I didn't realize that's who did the art.
Yeah, he does a lot of the illustrations for the Dodo Press does a lot of children's books, and he does a lot of those books.
Oh, awesome. Well, he did a fantastic job on it.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think so. I'm
yeah, it
amazed.
jumps right out. I mean, there's no mistaking what this book's about.
Yeah. One time I did mushrooms and I sat outside and I wasn't finished with the book, and the mushrooms were like, finish the book. We want our signpost. They're like, most people won't even necessarily read it. We want our signpost.
Just
And
get it out
so
there.
they have their signpost now. It really is a beautiful object.
It is. It is. And it's a great book. Lots of people are going to read this. I know
They
they are.
already are. It's really getting out there.
Good.
It got a review by this wonderful person, Molly Young, for New York Magazine, and she
Wow.
was great. She was like,
Nice.
If you like pluck and lesbian drama and embarking on projects, this is a book for you.
Yeah. Good for
And
her. She really
mushrooms, of
did
course.
say.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome. Um, I have a question. I don't know if it's fair. It sounds like you know your book pretty well. Um, I wrote a science fiction book, and I forget names of characters. So sometimes I wonder if it's fair to ask an author about a specific thing that I came across. But something that interested me is you said a mushroom trip can accelerate the karma that exists between people.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
That feels really true. Like I've had stories, I mean, for me personally, um, where I mentioned that in the book was I tripped with these two friends, and by the time the trip was done, I knew I wasn't going to be friends with them anymore. And
Oh,
I
wow.
know that people sometimes break up. Like they'll do mushrooms
Hmm.
together, hoping that it will bond them, and sometimes it really unravels things.
Mm.
And I've had that happen, not in romantic relationships, but definitely with friends. Yeah, a kind of
Yeah,
acceleration.
I see
Yeah.
what you mean there. Yeah. Moves it right along like it does with everything else.
Yeah, and like the trip that I did when I was 15 triggered like this huge heartbreak because I was having this weird romantic dalliance with this person who's a therapist and was like 27 years old, and I was 15. It was and the mushrooms made that whole thing fall apart in a really dramatic way.
Mm.
She was like, "You can't be in this program anymore because you did drugs," and I'm like, I thought my world had ended because I was so in love with her and everything. And I really blamed the mushrooms. I was like, oh, these are there must be bad witchery or something. And I think that was why I didn't have an open mind about psychedelics until much later.
So that actually helped because you've been through a lot in life, not just with the mushrooms. But I read about that, and I was going to ask you about that with stigma. Where you came out
Yeah.
about this and ended up losing this job. You
Yeah.
know, and you've had to come out before. And
Mm-hmm.
you've had to go through things. But that seemed like it was pretty, like it was a pretty big deal, and like you just said, I guess it made you put mushrooms down for a little bit.
Yeah, well, what's crazy is the land where I live in New Mexico, the person who brought me to the land and showed it to me was an apprentice to Maria Sabina in Mexico because he
Hmm.
lived there with his family as an expatriate Scottish guy. And so I remember he passed away, and I remember him talking about this elderly Mexican curandera, and it went in one ear and out the other.
Hmm.
And the fact that I blocked that out until starting to write the
Yeah.
book was a trip.
Wow. That is amazing. You came that close to that, and it took all that time later before you kind of had to dig it back out again.
Now I meet people who were like me, who just they have that weird disinterest,
Mm.
and I go, oh, they have a little bit of a block, and
Yeah.
it's interesting because I get some people that are just completely not interested, but that's different.
Yeah, different than somebody that you can see has a little spark of interest, but they've got themselves
Totally.
blocked.
Yep.
Interesting. So what other stigma around this have you had to
Oh,
deal with?
yeah. Well, I like to talk about how when I was growing them, um, I it was my first grow. Realized that I didn't like that it had changed me. I was doing this illegal thing, and I was now, I wasn't like selling them or anything. I just grew them and used them for personal use, but it really changed how I felt about myself as a citizen. Like I realized, man, I'm no longer a person who doesn't break the law in a certain kind of
Mm.
way. And I didn't really like it. And then I had a strange thing happen where I had a scare with what I thought was the DEA. It was
Oh.
like a weird scam phone call saying like, we're half an hour from your house. This is the DEA. And this was my first big mushroom grow. And I had just written about it in a local weekly. And it scared me half to death. It was the worst panic attack of my life. And my
Oh my
friend's like,
gosh.
girl, you are really freaking out. Like, do you think the Shipibo shamans traveling through the airport with their ayahuasca would freak out like you're freaking out? Like, what's wrong with you? And I was like, I'm not built for this. Like, I am not,
No, that would be scary. Was it like a prank call from somebody local just trying to outmoral you?
No, it was like an old lady shot herself because of this. It's people who've bought drugs online from those Mexican pharmacies. Like, they somehow
Hmm.
got a hold of people's numbers, and they call you and try to extort money.
Oh, good grief. That is so
Yeah.
awful.
So I hung up on them before they could do that, but it's still, I was carrying my terrariums and hiding them under juniper trees, and my girlfriend comes over, she's like, where'd you hide the terrariums? And I'm like, down there. And she's like, you could totally see it. And I was like, I had a freak out too, because I put the mushroom cakes like on the ground, and like, oh no, the coyotes are going to eat them and get sick. And my friend's like, don't you think coyotes know what drugs to take and what drugs not to take?
Yeah. Boy, what a freak out moment, huh?
Yeah.
That's awful.
I was a wreck.
Man, oh man, well, I'm glad you survived that.
Yeah, I mean, so many of these experiences just make me think about the drug laws and how, I'm a white person, and
Hmm.
like, people of color are just, it's always leaning against their situation, and it makes me think about it a lot.
Yeah, and it's such a white privilege to be able to just even talk about this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I was talking to somebody the other day who was like, oh yeah, because I'm like a white man, I can maybe have an obligation, to talk about it. I'm
Yes.
like, it's like, you're just, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, got to be careful with it. Got to be careful either way, but yeah, it's a privilege to even take the chance.
Yeah, now that I'm really public, I don't keep anything around. I mean, I see people dealing drugs on Instagram, and I get like, I don't know, maybe so many. I mean, I don't even like talking about that because I don't want to get them in trouble. But like, it's
Yeah.
it's people seem to be really open. And I've been in communities where people are they practically put a poster up at their local health food store. But like in the book, I talk about Monica Kram, how in South Africa, mushrooms told her to have ceremonies every Saturday, as many people as she can fit. And man, the South African SWAT team like crashed the party. And I think she's out on bail now, but I think her trial is still continuing.
Wow. Yeah, that's raining some fire down on yourself.
Yeah, and you can see it from one angle that it helps the destigmatization for that kind of thing, that kind of catastrophe to be visible. But then you
Hmm.
have in Oakland that church, and there was like a mushroom church, like they decriminalized it in Oakland, and this group of people just really took it too far. They were like selling it,
Mm.
and it's
Yeah.
like, yeah. I like the
Yeah.
idea of decriminalizing rather than legalization, because back in the old hippie days with Orange Sunshine, it was considered that you get like a rich person, right, and then you just give it away, and you give it
Right.
to people to give it away. It's really in keeping with the spirit of the medicine, I think, to not have commerce be part of it. But I also
Yeah.
have a lot of gratitude to the people who do make a living, because that's mostly how people get it.
Right. Yeah.
But
Makes
growing it is pretty easy, growing it. But I think in California you can't get spores, and
Oh yeah, there's some states where you can't do that.
yeah, I wonder if you can get it in Oakland now. It's decriminalized.
I don't know. I don't know. Um, all these journeys, I guess a couple last questions about the mushrooms, and then I want you to tell me anything you want to about mushrooms. But You did it with friends and you had people come visit in New Mexico and all these amazing things. Did you see friends who also had transformational experiences as you kind of looked on them during the journey, after the journey, long after the journey, where you recognized that they had some pretty amazing transformations themselves?
Yeah, that trip where I ended that paragraph, Be That Child
Hmm.
Peach,
Hmm.
I did with a friend of mine, and we both were equally blown away. We actually did two trips. Like, this is how creative nonfiction works. Like, can you imagine two God trips? Trying to, I'm like,
No.
I'm just gonna make it all in one. So yeah, like she was just run over in the best of ways. Yeah,
Yeah.
and had a big like Mary Magdalene Jesus thing going on, and just kind of thing where the next day you're just like, oh my God, what just happened?
Nice. So what about set and setting? That's a big thing that everybody talks about, right? Is to have the right
Yeah.
experience, you want to be in the right mindset, have the right setting. And you've talked about almost ritualistic things you do for these. But what is your perfect set and setting? And along with that, do you have any recommendations to other people in terms of managing and setting their set and setting?
I think um, having access to some kind of ground is good, but I don't think you have to be in quote unquote like the wilderness. I actually like to just be at home because I
Mm,
like to be as comfortable as possible. And I think there's a sense that Maria Sabina always said, do them at night because doing the daytime will make you crazy, you know.
mhm. Yeah.
and I don't agree with that at all, actually, but I see her point in that there is a lot of inner work that goes on, and it can be another job to have to just be, let's say, at a campsite that you're not familiar with or something, so that can be a lot of work to process
Yes.
um, your little spot in nature. So I highly recommend your own couch and that sort of thing.
Yeah. What about mindset?
Mindset. Um, I don't think it matters because if you're in a crappy, the only thing I really do not recommend is doing mushrooms if you've been on the internet too much. Like, and the only quote unquote bad trips that I've had are when I've been like really deep in social media and I just pace up and down the hall writing tweets in my head. And it's like,
Mm,
man, that's the only deep intention is like I will often unplug the Wi-Fi so even that slight vibration is not in the air. I try to do
yeah.
that. Um, Unfortunately, I play my music from my computer, so that doesn't help. Um, so yeah, I think there have been times where, like, I set a date to do mushrooms, and I'm not in a good mindset, and I try to do it anyway because maybe the mushrooms need to meet that difficult place.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
And do you remember any experiences like that where you're like, okay, I'm going to do it
yeah.
on this day, and you're just like, I'm not feeling it, I'm too busy or whatever, but I'm going to do it anyway. And then what happened?
Well, I was embroiled in like a court case where I was accused of something, and I was so
Mm,
angry. I was angry for months of just being like, why is this happening to me? And
yeah.
so of course I didn't do mushrooms for ages because I was like, I'm so upset. And so I took them and just went into that. It was like I the trip was about like all this masculine energy of like war, and I just explored
Hmm.
my own rage, and I think it helped like move some stuff that I've been holding in my body for sure, and it also brought up compassion for people who are in an extreme states like that, and
Mm,
I explored all kinds of like in my interiority. I'm not a violent person, and in the trip I explored like what would make somebody be violent, what does it feel like? And it was like, oh wow, yeah, we don't let ourselves explore the fact that as human animals we have this huge range of emotions and behaviors that arise from these emotions. And it was just
hmm.
really interesting like explore what drives people to be violent.
Wow, that's a big, powerful one.
Yeah.
I see what you mean then. Because at first
Yeah.
when you said, I don't know if setting matters, I was like, what? It has to matter.
Yeah.
So
But
that's
yeah,
another
somebody
one
was
of
like,
those things you're breaking.
I want to go to Costco or something on mushrooms. And I'm like, that does not interest me. I went to Gay Pride on mushrooms and it was horrible.
It was?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Everyone looked sick.
Oh my gosh.
Except for like two people. And then Beth and I kind of followed them around because they were the only people and hundreds of people that weren't, that in my opinion didn't look sick. And I went up to this person one time because they were like a docent at our local gallery or whatever. And I was like, if you saw two old lesbians following you around at the last Gay Pride, it was us. And they laughed really hard. I
That's
was like,
awesome.
you were like one of two people who didn't look sick.
Wow, that's interesting. I could like to know more about that because it's like when you're on a mushroom trip and you look at nature, you're like, oh, that tree is not doing as well as I thought it was doing.
Yeah.
You know,
No,
you
all
can
these people,
see things
I
like
live in
that.
Santa Fe. Everybody's, lives on like juice and doing all their new age things. And I'm like, oh
Right.
yeah, you're going to die tomorrow. Like, I don't know, go to the doctor.
Wow, it's like walking among the living dead or something.
Totally.
And you find these
That's
two
why I don't
angels,
like
like they're
those.
okay. We'll follow them around.
Yeah, I do have a certain, that happens on mushrooms a lot as a kind of medical site. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, not that I was accurate. I mean, clearly it is not, physically possible that everyone at Gay Pride had some sort
Right.
of health problem. But
Wow. That's hilarious. I love that one. So, anything else, Bet? I mean, that's all I've got. What do you want to tell us about the book? Any more stories? Any more anecdotes? Do you want to read any more parts? Anything you want to share about the book, before we wrap up?
well, one thing occurred to me that I hadn't thought of about my book is that it's very much, I always think of it as coming out of like Tom Robbins and Ken Kesey tradition of that kind of
Hmm.
60s psychedelia. But I realized that I'm a Gen Xer from the 90s and that I was raised on drug books. Like I didn't
Yeah.
really start reading until in my 20s. And there was like Prozac Nation, Go Ask Alice, and Bret Easton Ellis, and Michelle T. and Lori Weeks. Like those were the books that I read, and they were all about people getting run over by drugs and like surviving enough to write a book. And I realized that that's in the same tradition, and how wonderful with mushrooms you don't have to have your life in
Yeah.
danger or addiction. It actually
Hmm.
helps with addiction. I mean, it's really pretty amazing how LSD and mushrooms can assist with addictions of all kinds. Wish it would help me more with my internet addiction, however.
Yeah. Maybe.
Maybe I'll ask them. Maybe I need to do a journey and just directly ask for help.
Yeah. Say, help me with this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
And
that's
when I
fantastic.
say, yeah, I will say, like, when I say I don't go in with intent, it's usually because I need to get about 40 minutes in, and then I sort of suss out the space and I will say prayers. And I find that trips have certain phases. There's towards the end of a mushroom trip, like 8 hours or 7 hours in, when it's starting to come down a little bit. That's when I find the ancestors come to give me teachings.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's sort of consistent.
How did they come to you?
I feel a presence, and sometimes I'll even have a kind of conversation with a presence that feels like an other, and
Hmm.
I'll have a little chat.
Wow. And that comes near the end.
Yeah, and also I do self massage, and that tends to come at the end as well. And if there's someone who's lucky enough to be with me, I give really good massage towards the end of
Oh,
my trips. And Beth, my girlfriend, will attest. Yeah,
nice. That's awesome because you feel that need to bond and heal.
yeah. It's like the medicine works on me, and then I become, I guess I become the medicine. Like that's when
Yeah.
I have that skill to heal myself and start to divine wisdom from the ancestors that are present. It's like that's where they're not working on me anymore, and it's like, yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Well, Bett, thank you so much for coming on here on the podcast. That was so much good information, and you have like a really unique perspective on this, and obviously not stuck in paradigms of what everybody else is chiming around there. So, yeah, thank you for sharing all that, and everybody, please, go out and get that book right now. It's awesome.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
That concludes this edition of the Stoned Ape Reports. Thank you for listening. Please follow us on Instagram at Stoned Ape Comedy and subscribe to our newsletter at www.stonedapecomedy.com. Again, thanks for listening, and catch you next time, Stoned Apes.